On the morning of April 3, 2023, the FBI's Los Angeles field office executed simultaneous raids on 4 separate locations across the city: a warehouse in Compton, a rented loft in Silver Lake, a storage unit in Burbank, and a seemingly ordinary townhouse in Pasadena. By 7:14 a.m., 6 individuals were in handcuffs. By 8 a.m., the story had hit every major news outlet in California. The headlines called it the most sophisticated series of coordinated financial heists in Los Angeles history. Over a period of 22 months, an organized crew had systematically targeted 6 high-security financial institutions across Southern California, not with guns, not with threats, but with something far more dangerous: perfect information, inside knowledge, surgical precision, the kind of planning that does not come from the streets. 6 arrests, 6 suspects, millions of dollars in stolen funds partially recovered, a city that exhaled. But inside the FBI's secured operations room on Wilshire Boulevard, Senior Special Agent Marcus Holt stood in front of a whiteboard and stared at something that made him deeply uneasy. He had 6 people in custody. He had a mountain of evidence. He had a case that, on paper, was closed. What he did not have was the architect. Because while 6 members of the most elegant financial crime operation Los Angeles had ever seen were being photographed, fingerprinted, and processed, the woman who had designed every single one of their moves, the woman without whom none of it would have been possible, the woman who had mapped the vulnerabilities, constructed the playbooks, and managed the money trails with the precision of a Goldman Sachs derivatives analyst, was already gone. Her apartment in Brentwood was immaculate. Her Le Creuset pots were still on the stove. Her dry cleaning was still on the rack. Her passport, the one the US government knew about, was still in her bedside drawer. Vivian Adiz Okafor, 38 years old, former vice president of structured finance at Pacific Meridian Bank, had simply ceased to exist. And the most frightening part? Nobody had even known to look for her until it was too late. To understand Vivian Okafor, you first have to understand the world she inhabited and the extraordinary effort she expended every single day to belong to it. She was born in Enugu, Nigeria, in 1985, the second of 4 children of a civil engineer father and a secondary school principal mother. Both parents were educated, exacting, and deeply invested in the idea that excellence was not a ceiling, it was a floor. By the time Vivian was 12, she was solving calculus problems her older brother brought home from university. By 16, she had been identified by her school as what the Nigerian education system called a distinction candidate, the kind of student the system produced once in a decade. She arrived in the United States on a full academic scholarship to the University of Southern California at age 19, carrying 1 suitcase, 1 carry-on bag, and a precision of ambition that her roommate of 4 years, a woman named Stephanie Chow, would later describe to investigators as the most quietly intimidating thing I have ever been in close proximity to. She wasn't competitive in the way some people are competitive, Stephanie told the FBI in May 2023. She didn't need to beat you. She just needed to be the best version of herself every single day without fail. It was like watching someone who had decided very early on exactly who they were going to become and was simply executing the plan. Vivian graduated summa cum laude with a double major in finance and applied mathematics. She was recruited before graduation by 3 firms. She chose Pacific Meridian Bank, one of the most respected mid-tier financial institutions on the West Coast, because, and this is documented in her onboarding paperwork, in the section asking candidates to articulate their motivation, she wrote, "I want to understand how money actually moves. Not how textbooks say it moves. How it actually moves." In retrospect, that sentence reads like a mission statement. She rose through Pacific Meridian's ranks with the kind of velocity that makes colleagues simultaneously admire and resent you. Junior analyst at 22. Associate at 25. Senior associate at 27. Vice President of Structured Finance before she turned 33. A title that, in the language of investment banking, represented a level of seniority that most people spent 15 years chasing. She was known for 3 things: her analytical mind, her impeccable presentation, and her ability to identify structural vulnerabilities in financial systems that other people had missed. She was the person you called when a deal was complicated. She was the person you called when something didn't add up. She was, her colleagues universally agreed, frighteningly good at seeing how things could go wrong. Outside the office, Vivian lived the life of a woman who had earned every inch of her success. A two-bedroom apartment in Brentwood, west of the 405. A black BMW 5 Series. A membership at a private fitness studio in Santa Monica. Weekends at gallery openings and charity galas. A social media presence that was curated to the point of architecture. Every photo considered, every caption precise, every image a careful composition of the life she had built. She looked, by every available metric, like a woman who had everything to lose. That, as Detective David Asimo would eventually understand, was not an accident. The first incident occurred in June 2021. Pacific Coast Credit Union in Santa Monica reported an internal wire transfer anomaly, a series of microtransactions, each individually below the automated flagging threshold, that over the course of 11 days had collectively redirected $2.3 million into a network of shell accounts across 3 different financial institutions. By the time compliance detected the pattern, the money had moved through 7 layers of accounts and was, for all practical purposes, gone. The FBI's Financial Crimes Unit opened a file. They assumed it was a sophisticated phishing operation, an external actor who had obtained employee credentials. It was the obvious explanation, and nothing in the initial investigation challenged it. The case was assigned a priority level of 2 out of 5 and placed in a queue behind 47 other open matters. The second incident came 4 months later. First Landmark Savings in Culver City. A different institution. A different methodology, this time a series of fraudulent loan origination documents so perfectly constructed that they had passed through 3 separate layers of human review before anyone noticed the borrowers didn't exist. The dollar amount, $4.1 million. The discovery timeline, 63 days after the funds had moved. By the third incident, Westside Federal in El Segundo, January 2022, $3.8 million, an insider trading scheme wrapped inside a legitimate corporate restructuring. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division had created a task force. Because the thing that connected all 3 cases was not a methodology. The methodology changed each time. What connected them was a quality, a standard, a fingerprint that wasn't really a fingerprint at all, but rather an absence of fingerprints, the kind of operational cleanliness that told experienced investigators they were not dealing with opportunistic criminals. They were dealing with someone who had spent time inside the system. Special Agent Marcus Holt, who took over as lead on the task force in March 2022, put it plainly in his case notes. Whoever is designing these operations has deep institutional knowledge of bank compliance architecture, transaction monitoring systems, and regulatory reporting thresholds. This is not learned from the internet. This is learned from the inside. The task force had a name for their unknown subject, the architect. They had no face, no name, no gender, just a set of methods so elegant they were, in the private vocabulary of the investigators who were hunting them, almost beautiful. Over the next 14 months, 3 more institutions were hit. The amounts grew. The methods evolved. And with each new case, the task force's file on the architect thickened with analysis and thinned on actual leads. They had identified 7 members of the operational crew, people who executed the schemes on the ground level. 4 of them had criminal records. 3 were former bank employees who had been terminated for minor compliance violations. All of them, when surveillance eventually located them, were careful, disciplined. They did not communicate through normal channels. They did not meet in obvious places. Someone had trained them very, very well. David Asimo was not supposed to be on this case. He was a 44-year-old LAPD financial crimes detective who had been seconded to the FBI task force as a liaison, a role that, in the bureaucratic language of interagency collaboration, meant he attended meetings, reviewed shared documents, and generally served as the city's institutional memory on local financial crime patterns. He was not a lead investigator. He was not expected to break the case. He was a compact, unhurried man from Glendale who had spent 20 years in financial crimes and had developed, over that time, a quality that his colleagues alternately admired and found irritating. He did not accept the obvious explanation simply because it was obvious. He asked one more question. He pulled one more thread. He sat with a piece of evidence a little longer than everyone else and waited to see if it would tell him something different. His entry point into Vivian Okafor's story came not from a database search or a surveillance photo, but from a conversation he had at a financial regulation conference in downtown Los Angeles in November 2022, one of those catered lunch affairs where regulators and bankers and law enforcement people drink bad coffee and listen to presentations about emerging fraud typologies. He was standing by the coffee station when a man named Gerald Park, a compliance officer at Pacific Meridian Bank whom Asimo had worked with on a previous case, made an offhand comment that lodged itself in the back of Asimo's mind like a splinter. "It's funny," Gerald said, stirring his coffee, "we had someone leave last year who was literally the best person we've ever had at identifying this exact type of scheme. She used to say that these microtransfer patterns were the easiest vulnerability to exploit if you knew where to look. Left to go work for herself, apparently. Private consulting." He paused. "Kind of ironic, right?" Asimo smiled and nodded and made a mental note and said nothing. He pulled Pacific Meridian's senior staff departure records the next morning. Vivian Adiz Okafor. Resigned August 2020. 15 years of service. VP of Structured Finance. Departure classified as voluntary. Exit interview, amicable. Reason given, pursuing independent consulting opportunities. The timing was precise. She had left Pacific Meridian 11 months before the first heist. Asimo sat with that for a long time. He ran her name through every available database. Clean record. No flags. No suspicious financial activity on her personal accounts. At least none that was immediately visible. Her tax filings were immaculate. Her credit score was 814. She was, by every official measure, a successful professional woman who had left a corporate career to consult independently, which thousands of people do every year. But Asimo had spent 20 years learning that the most dangerous financial criminals are the ones whose personal finances look the most legitimate. Because people who understand money understand how to make money look clean. He requested authorization to begin a soft surveillance of Vivian Okafor on December 1, 2022. His supervisor approved it with minimal enthusiasm. "It's thin, David," she told him. A timing coincidence and an offhand comment from a compliance officer. "I know," Asimo said, "but something smells wrong." What surveillance revealed over the next 3 months was, on the surface, almost disappointingly ordinary. Vivian kept a consistent schedule. She left her Brentwood apartment between 7:30 and 8:15 most mornings, drove to a coffee shop in Santa Monica where she worked on a laptop for 2 to 3 hours, then proceeded to various meetings around the city, lunch appointments, afternoon sessions at co-working spaces, occasional visits to what appeared to be the offices of various financial services firms. She worked out at her fitness studio 3 times a week. She had dinner with friends every 10 days or so. She attended 2 charity events in January and 1 gallery opening in February. She was, Asimo's team reported, living exactly the life her social media said she was living. Which was, Asimo noted privately, unusual in itself. Most people's real lives deviate from their curated online presence in dozens of small, observable ways. Vivian's didn't. Not because she was particularly careful about her surveillance behavior, she showed no signs of counter-surveillance awareness, but because the life she had constructed was, apparently, a costume she wore with complete consistency. There was no deviation because there was nothing accidental about any of it. The breakthrough came not from surveillance but from a forensic accountant named Linda Reyes, who had been quietly excavating Vivian's financial architecture for 6 weeks when she surfaced a network of entities that stopped everyone in the room cold. Over a period of 4 years, beginning in 2019, a full year before she resigned from Pacific Meridian, Vivian had quietly established 7 limited liability companies across 4 states, using a combination of nominee directors, registered agent services, and a legal structure so layered that untangling it required 3 separate forensic accountants working in parallel. The companies had innocuous names. They had websites. They had LinkedIn pages. 2 of them had even filed legitimate consulting contracts with real financial firms. But beneath the legitimate surface, the companies formed a network of conduits, entities through which money could move, be recharacterized, be split and recombined, and ultimately emerge looking like clean consulting income. Linda Reyes, presenting her findings to the task force on February 28, 2023, called it the most sophisticated personal money laundering architecture I have seen in 22 years of forensic accounting. She wasn't just designing the heists, Reyes told the room. She was building the infrastructure to absorb the proceeds before the heists even happened. She started building the exit architecture before she started committing the crimes. The room went quiet. It was Asimo who spoke first. She wasn't reacting to opportunities, he said. She was executing a plan she made years ago. This whole thing, the corporate career, the reputation, the network, it was all research. The decision to dig deeper into Vivian's personal life was not made lightly. It required a federal judge's authorization and generated significant internal debate within the task force about proportionality and privacy. What it uncovered changed the emotional texture of the entire investigation. The first thing investigators found was the debt. Not Vivian's debt. She had none, as her spotless credit history confirmed. Her father's debt. Emmanuel Okafor, 67 years old, retired civil engineer, Enugu State. In 2017, Emmanuel had co-signed a business loan for Vivian's younger brother, Chukwemeka, who had been attempting to establish a construction firm. The business had failed within 18 months. The debt, compounded by local financial institution interest rates that would have been considered predatory anywhere in the world, had grown to a figure that, in Nigerian naira, represented the complete destruction of the Okafor family's financial security. Emmanuel's pension, the family home, 2 decades of savings. Vivian had been sending money home since 2018. Significant amounts, more than her Pacific Meridian salary comfortably accommodated, investigators noted, though not so much as to trigger immediate compliance flags. The transfers were always structured, always just below the automatic reporting thresholds, always to different accounts. She had been practicing long before the heists began. The second thing was the relationship. Between 2019 and 2021, Vivian had been in a relationship with a man named Terrence Wills, a fact that was not visible on her social media, not mentioned in any of her communications on her known devices, and not known to any of her friends who were interviewed by investigators. Terrence Wills was 41 years old, a former IT security specialist at a mid-tier financial institution in Phoenix who had been terminated in 2018 following an internal investigation into unauthorized system access. He had not been criminally charged. He had, however, been placed on a financial industry blacklist that effectively ended his career in legitimate finance. How Vivian and Terrence had met was never fully established. What investigators established was that Terrence Wills had technical capabilities that perfectly complemented Vivian's institutional knowledge. He knew how to penetrate the digital infrastructure of financial systems. She knew precisely which parts of the infrastructure were worth penetrating. They were, in the cold language of criminal conspiracy analysis, a complete package. The third thing was the most painful. In the winter of 2016, Vivian had applied for a promotion to managing director at Pacific Meridian, a role she was, by every performance metric, the most qualified candidate for. She had been passed over. The person promoted was a man named Craig Sherwood, who had been with the bank for 6 years fewer than Vivian, whose performance reviews were consistently good but not exceptional, and who had, in the institutional memory of Pacific Meridian's executive floor, something that Vivian did not: a golf game and a comfort level with the bank's majority-white senior leadership that Vivian, brilliant, composed, impeccably professional, had never quite achieved. That was the moment Vivian stopped believing in the system. And once that belief was gone, there was nothing left to stop her. Because over the next 2 years, she wouldn't just walk away from that world. She would study it, exploit it, and then disappear from it completely. Part 2 is where the investigation begins, and where things get far more dangerous. Subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this ends,